All right, hello, East Central, and thank you for tuning into another Facebook, YouTube Live. I am Brandon Oliver. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for East Central ISD, and we got a very important broadcast tonight. I know there's a lot that's been in the news and things like that, so we're going to address all that right now. But I want to bring on the Superintendent of Schools, Mr. Roland Toscano. And Superintendent Toscano, how are you doing this evening?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic, Brandon. It's been a couple of weeks since we've gotten together on this Facebook, YouTube live platform, and so I'm excited about being together with you this evening, and more excited about the updates we have for the community. We certainly have a lot to talk about tonight, especially regarding safety as it relates to COVID-19 and its current context here in San Antonio. But I also want to give the community a little bit of an update around how the educational program has been going, what we're seeing, and what we think we need to do going forward. And then lastly, I want to reiterate an announcement we made earlier this week for faculty and staff.
All right, real quick before we dive in, Mr. Toscano, it's amazing that we started doing these Facebook Lives, I think, in July. And I mean, we blinked and here we are, getting ready to go into the holiday Christmas break. It seems like it's gone by really fast, but I think it's been really helpful to the community to be so transparent.
Yeah, it's certainly been a blink of an eye. There's no doubt about that. Every day's been a new day. Every week's been a new week.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, so let's jump in. Let's jump into the safety, and I'll bring up one of, I guess, the Germ Blast ATP results.
Yeah, well, we had a couple of priorities going to this year that we were really focused on. And the first one was obviously the safety of all of our students and our staff. We wanted to make sure that we as an East Central community were doing our part to suppress the spread of the virus in the greater San Antonio community. And to do that, we know that we have to take local action and we have to pay attention to our local context. And, outside of an order to close from the governor, the only other tools that we have to consider closure would be guidance from the local health director. But at the end of the day, the decision to stay open and or the decision to shut down, is a local decision. And so we have to work really hard to have good information for our school board to consider to determine what's appropriate in terms of face-to-face options for kids. And so one of the things that we've actually been doing since 2018 was working together with a company called Germ Blast. And they come in and they provide comprehensive pre-treatment testing, and then they administer, very comprehensive and reliable disinfection throughout our facilities and buses across the district. And then they do post-treatment testing. And so what I thought was important to point out here was that since January 18 until August 20th, these are each of the comprehensive disinfection treatments that Germ Blast's done in the district. Now, they do treatments intermittently as we see the need, but these are extremely comprehensive. And ATP, for those who aren't biology nerds in the world, ATP is cellular energy. Basically, it energizes, it's evidence that there is something living on a surface. And so they test surfaces throughout the district before they treat, and they get a report of the number of ATP. And I believe the levels somewhere around 200, 240 are optimal. And as you can see, in October of 2020, prior to the district's comprehensive treatment, we saw levels lower, more than 50% lower than at any other time since 2018. And what Germ Blast tells us is that means that all of the efforts that each of our teachers are doing, wiping down surfaces multiple times a day, kids and teachers in our buildings regularly washing hands and sanitizing, as well as the work that we're doing with our HVAC systems, circulating air, our custodians, first and foremost, using EMS technology being reliable in terms of daily disinfection and disinfection throughout the day, that the entire team effort has yielded less living particles on our surfaces before germ blast even treats our facilities than ever since any other time since 2018. So we take that as evidence that the things that we're doing to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 in our buildings is working exceptionally well in the area of cleaning and disinfecting.
I mean, really, I talk about it from a sports term, it's not even close. I mean, you go back, 2018, January, it's 371. And then, October 2020 is 130. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That it really shows that, yeah, like you said, all the efforts are working.
Yeah, and I think what we think is it's definitely contributed, along with many variables, to why, even though we've seen some positive cases in the district, we haven't seen any outbreaks. And so, Brandon, if you could pull up from our health services page our weekly or our most recent weekly update of positive cases in the district, we can see that since August we're at 87. We've had 39 employees that we've confirmed positive for COVID-19 and 48 students. If you look at the number of employees per, as compared to the positives, and number of students as compared to the positives, you can see that we're talking about 0.2 and 0.05 of a positivity rate. So definitely a very low positivity rate as it relates to staff and students to the whole population in our facilities. And if you go down, Brandon, we report that to the public. We also report this to Barometro Health, and we report this to the Texas Education Agency on a weekly basis. This is cumulative. You can see at each of our campuses the total number of confirmed cases. And you can see, again, it's on our health services page. And then, of course, we also report it weekly. So we can see, we're kind of trying to see if there's any trends on any given weeks, or most recently, any trends of increasing positivity, numbers of positive cases in our buildings. And keep in mind that also in the last 3 weeks, we've been taking volunteers to test each Monday using community labs as a partner. And that would be to test folks who have no symptoms, but just in the event that they're positive and don't know it, we can get them, out of the group and prevent it's just another mitigation measure. And we're intending to scale that more broadly across the district. In fact, we'll be adding staff at Legacy and Heritage on Monday. We're continuing to work with Texas Education and other partners to broaden our testing as a screening tool, because it seems to help us mitigate transmission in our buildings more effectively. Also, Brandon, if you'll go back up and to the right of the screen, the other thing that we've been paying attention to is at the bottom of that table, you'll see Bexar County. That's the total population of Bexar County. Since the beginning of the pandemic, out of 2,040,000 plus citizens in Bexar County, we've seen a total of 45,000 positive cases. Of course, this past week, there were 1,428 active cases reported. We know that number's been on the increase of late. But overall, I just wanted you to see that we're talking about 2% positivity rate with respect to the population in Bexar County. In other words, all of the citizens who live in Bexar County, 2% of the citizens have tested at some point since last March positive for COVID-19. And then if you take the zip codes as they're reported through Metro Health that feed into East Central ISD schools, independent of one another, you can see the total population in each of our East Central ISD zip codes and the number of active cases and the number of total cases in each of the zip codes that feeds our schools. And again, you can look at the positivity rate of each zip code. 78223 has the highest positivity rate of 5% of 54,517 citizens who reside in 78223 here in East Central ISD. And so that's important because positivity rate that's reported in the media on a weekly basis is nothing more than the percentage of positive cases based on the population who tested that week. So if you have a low number of tests in any given week, it could potentially reflect proportionately a high positivity rate. And of course, it's been reported that we're at 15.6 or 7% positive. Well, that was the number of positive tests of those who tested last week. But this is an indicator of the total percentage of the population in the entire county. And again, with respect to decentralized zip codes, within our zip codes, the percent of the population that was positive. So that's a different way to look at positivity rate. In fact, I would argue that if we're wondering what percent of the population is or has been positive for COVID-19, this is the table you look at, not the weekly positivity rate indicator, which is just that. It's just an indicator, but not indicative of the entire population. So not to be confused, 15.6% positivity rate last week is not to be confused with 15% of the Bexar County population is positive for COVID-19. That is absolutely a misunderstanding. Also down there at the bottom, Brandon, there's a tab to the right that says testing data. And so those students attend Cass Lead and staff who work at Cass Lead, and those who attend East Central High School and work at East Central High School. And again, on Monday, those that work at Legacy Middle School and Heritage Middle School will become more familiar with Community Labs testing. And Community Labs is a nonprofit organization in the city that's been funded in multiple ways to provide screening for populations who aren't presenting with COVID-19 symptoms necessarily. And it's an effort to ensure that asymptomatic folks in the population aren't unintentionally spreading COVID-19. And so we've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 weeks at the high school and at Cass. And gradually we've been increasing the number of folks testing. What I wanted to point out is that while it's at least for now, it's a relatively small population tested, the number of positives has been very low with respect to the number tested. In fact, a better indication of what Community Labs data is telling us in Bexar County, and in particular South Bexar County, at the bottom, Community Labs was willing to share with us all of the results of the 29,704 tests. Those are the total tests that they've administered in school districts in our area. And they've had 154 total positive tests, a 5% positivity rate. Again, a very different than the 15.7% positivity rate that is an indicator of the positive test results from the pool of tests that were administered last week. Again, a very important indicator, 15 point whatever percent is, but it is not an indicator of the percent of the population that is positive for COVID-19. Also, Brandon, I'd like to, if you would, shift to the Metro Health dashboard. I want to talk to the community about the 2 different dashboards that are often referred to in Bexar County. This is the Bexar County dashboard, and you've seen this many times, but you'll see the 7 indicators across the bottom of the color bars. You got 2-week decline, testing capacity, all the way down to positivity rate and hospital stress. Across the world, across the country, those are the indicators that everybody watches to inform decisions that we need to make as a population in response to what we're seeing from the pandemic. We as a school district have adopted this indicator bar as a way to inform our decisions for serving students face-to-face and the degree to which we will or won't. Currently, that indicator bar, while worsening in recent weeks, is at moderate. Now, I think it would be important to go ahead and show our district's corresponding reentry protocol, again, which many of you have seen many times before. You can see the color bars across the top from phase 1 to phase 5 match the Bexar Metro Health dashboard. And if you blow up phase 3, which is where we are, Brandon, you'll see that as we look at the building status, 50% of students can be learning in person. Now, 50% of students is what we decided. All of the guidance refers to a percentage of folks occupying space as a percentage of occupancy. So 50% of our occupancy is very different than 50% of our enrolled students. In fact, if we go by occupancy, we have space for a lot more students in our buildings. And I'll show you what I mean by that a little bit later. But if you'll go down in phase 3 a little further again, right there under risk mitigation, many students learning remotely at home, up to 50% receiving in-person instruction. And so as it currently stands, 50% of enrollment with really the ability to extend into capacity, probably more than 50% based on the Metro Health dashboard and our entry protocol here that our board adopted. We feel like currently we're in a good place to continue doing what we're doing. But I want to go back for a minute to the Bexar County dashboard, and in particular, Brandon, the school indicator bar, because I want to show you the difference. Okay, so you'll see right away that there's only 3 color indicators instead of 5. Also, that what Dr. Wu has done is she lifted from the 7 indicators the 14-day decline, the positivity rate, and the number of cases per 100,000 people in the population. Those 3 indicators currently are severe. And they also tend to be the 3 indicators that fluctuate the most. They're the most volatile. And so we knew that early on. We here in East Central ISD, as well as, to my knowledge, all other 19 independent school districts in the greater San Antonio area, realized that if we just use this as it's written, it would be very difficult for transitions to happen. I'm going to give you an example. About 4 weeks ago, the positivity rate for a particular week of testing fell under 5%. Because it fell under 5%, this indicator bar went all the way to green, which meant that everybody could be in school face-to-face. But the next week, it went back up to 5.3%. So it went from like 4.7% one week to 5.3. Still seems very manageable, but because that indicator is very volatile, and because this dashboard only uses 3 indicators, when one goes to severe, it has a dramatic effect on where the bar slides. And so from 1 week to the next, we went from being able to have on a Friday everybody in school to on Monday nobody recommended to be in school. Very similar to where we are today. Remote instruction is recommended for everybody. So as you can see, as a community, if we would have had to have on a Friday evening with everybody available to come face to face, tell our community, hey, whether you have childcare or not, whether you have days off from work or not, your kids can't come to school on Monday because this dashboard says that. So not practical in implementation, but definitely a tool that we've utilized in part of all of the data that we've utilized to determine if what we're doing is safe. And so in total, well, and Brandon, thanks for scrolling down, because I do want to point one more thing out here. The total cases in all respective 19 ISDs across the Bexar County and San Antonio area is 1,074 positive cases confirmed in schools. If you go down to outbreaks, there have been 7. So here's the deal. Of all of our cases of COVID-19, for which each and every one we've contact traced in partnership with Metro Health, Metro Health's findings were that even if we were investigating more than one case at the same time in any building in our district, Metro Health determined that they were unrelated. In other words, they weren't transmitted at school to one another. Therefore, there was not an outbreak. If there was ever an outbreak, it requires a temporary closure to get things disinfected and under control. If there is not an outbreak, then the individuals involved and those that are in close contact have to follow the guidance of quarantine and isolation and all of those things. But it does not affect the ability to remain open. Only a governor order or a confirmed outbreak will mandate a closure of an entire building or an entire district. I just want to be clear about that. And you can see that if I'm saying we've not had one, and out of 19 school districts, all of which, like us, have many buildings and many schools, there's only been 7 confirmed by barometric health. So I say that to say that you can rest assured that what I'm telling you is accurate, and that we've been completely transparent and have worked very carefully with Metro Health, and we have followed all of their guidance in each and every instance. So again, in totality, when we look at the positive cases in the district, when we look at our germ blast disinfection data, when we look at the community labs testing data, when we look at the dashboards together and look at the entire context, and we continue to follow our reentry protocols, we believe that with a 0.5% or less in every zip code of East Central ISD's population testing positive, and a very much smaller percentage of the population in our schools coming to school or work or being at school and work having tested positive, that it's safe to be in school. And that's a great thing for us as a school community. But that also aligns with what we're hearing across the city, across the state, and across the country, that what we feared in August when we were opening about bringing people into our buildings, congregating large numbers of students into our schools, potentially perpetuating the spread of COVID-19, that has not happened since August, not here in East Central, not anywhere else in the city, and not anywhere else in the country, in fact. And so we've recently heard President-elect Biden say that for schools that have been closed across the country in his first 100 days, his goal is to get them all back open because we need to get kids in school. Kids not being in school is worse than a public health crisis, and a public education crisis and its long-term implications is much worse than what we're seeing in terms of risk indicators for COVID transmission in our buildings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toscano. I do have a few questions for you.
Okay.
So the positivity rate in August is similar to now. What do we know now that we didn't then?
A whole lot. One thing is that in August, we didn't really understand, and we didn't have enough data to understand that what we saw in August was the positivity rate of a batch of tests for that week. And we didn't have data over time to indicate how much of the Bexar County population has tested positive, how much of each zip code within the county had tested positive, like I explained earlier. The other thing we didn't know in August was, if we have to have students in our buildings and we have to ask them to wear a mask and rely on them to wear a mask, even some of our younger children, would they do it? Could we guarantee that staff and students would wear a mask? Could we guarantee that we could disinfect adequately? Could we guarantee that we could keep them distanced adequately and do all of the things that risk mitigation requires? We didn't know. We'd never implemented those kinds of protocols before. The other thing we didn't know is what would happen if we had a large number, even half of our students in our buildings and all of our employees in our buildings. Would we perpetuate the spread of COVID-19? Because it hadn't been done before, we didn't know. And so out of an abundance of caution, the directive essentially was that we had to open, but we could only open remotely. So we brought all of our staff back. We implemented our risk mitigation protocols. We practiced them as adults. We felt like we were keeping ourselves safe, and then gradually began to introduce students. Fast forward to today, I've shared all of the data we monitor on a daily and weekly basis, and you can see that among many reasons, our risk mitigation is working. Positivity rates in schools are much lower than they are in the community. And we haven't had any outbreaks in any of our buildings and in any of our schools. And so for all of those reasons, what we know today is schools are safe for children who want to be there. School is safe for staff that are required to be there. And that the greater risk is what we all do as citizens in our social circles. And as we gather in public places that may not require risk mitigation, that is where the greater risk lies as a greater community and as individuals, not in schools.
And I want to echo someone's comment. Miss Melvin said, "Thank you so much for always being so transparent, breaking down the data." And that's crucial, I think, is not only being transparent, but breaking it down so we can understand beyond headlines. Because, the headline reads this, and it's so helpful to have the superintendent break it down for us and really explain what it means. Um, Another question. Okay, so let's go worst case scenario. You know, what do we do if this worsens?
If you don't mind, go back to the Metro Health dashboard, Brandon. I'm sorry. In fact, go to the reentry protocol. I think that'll illustrate my point a little bit better. Okay, so go up to the top. We're currently in phase 3. And so what we know is if the Bexar County, the San Antonio Metro Health dashboard keeps moving towards orange and red, we're going to go to this protocol. And let's say that, in the next couple of weeks, we find ourselves in phase 4. So looking at our guidelines, if you go down, Brandon, to the instructional environment, you'll see that the great majority of students learning remotely at home and up to 25% receiving in-person instruction. And so what that means is that currently, and again, I'm going to share the percentage of students in our buildings that are actually coming face-to-face in just a moment, as well as what percentage of our total capacity in each building that makes up. But what that means is that now we're getting close to having to control our numbers of students in our buildings. And so our next strategy, basically going in reverse order from how we phased in, may very well be that we're going to have to fall back to the emergency schedules that we were on that we began around the 3rd or 4th week of school, meaning that every child will come to school face to face 2 or 3 weeks in alternating weeks. And of course, there was always a small percentage of students that had the greatest need that were allowed to come from the very first day of school face to face, but it was a very small percentage of students. So in order to control the percentage of students down closer to 25%, we may find ourselves again reintroducing the emergency schedule. If we found ourselves all the way down into the red column, even over the break before we re-entered, or even after we came back after the break, at any point in time, at that point, you'll see that all students are learning remotely, no UIO or extracurricular activities. So, we're going to be transparent. We're going to follow the entire dashboard. We're going to overlay our reentry protocol, and we're going to make sure that the community knows what's going on, why it's going on, when it's going on. And at the end of the day, we know that every child has what they need to continue to learn face-to-face or remotely if necessary. We feel like it's the best we can do, and we feel like the data is, again, reflecting that we're doing it in the safest possible manner.
Parents were given, a lot of choice going into this thing. I guess maybe just talk a little bit about parent choice. Why be so flexible? Why is that important?
Yeah, we went into this year trying to create the conditions where parents had multiple options. It's definitely a logistical nightmare to have students fluctuating back and forth between face-to-face and remote. But we just knew that this is a very sensitive issue. The health and well-being of all of our children and ultimately our community and our staff is paramount. And there's a whole host of reasons why families aren't comfortable with their children being in school throughout the terms of this pandemic, regardless of what the data is saying in East Central ISD. And we understand that. And we didn't want to put our community in a position where we are forcing children to come face to face if a family wasn't comfortable with that. And so from the onset, we have been very flexible with families who are to choose what they prefer and what seems to make the most sense and what's serving their children the best. And along the way, we've seen students matriculate from remote only to kind of an emergency schedule. We have several students who chose to stay on that schedule, even though an everyday face-to-face option's been available. And we've seen students who have come face-to-face every day who, for whatever reason, chose to go back to a remote setting. And again, we've been very flexible, and the key is that it's a parent's choice. So, I think given that, Brandon, it's a good time. It's a nice segue into the enrollment by modality data that we've been tracking.
Absolutely. I'll put that up right now. Here we go.
So again, many of you have seen this before. If I just use the high school, East Central High School as an example, currently at the high school, there are 340 students that come every single day. There's 1,272 students that chose to stay on the hybrid schedule, meaning that they alternate 2 days 1 week and 3 days face-to-face the next, and in between they're participating remotely, which essentially means that 1,500 students from the high school have been opting lately for remote instruction. Now, as you get down into the lower levels, you see a much smaller percentage of the population. When we get into our elementary grade levels, much larger percentage of students are coming face-to-face. I'll use Sinclair and Tradition as examples. Sinclair has 369 kids. Tradition has 462 kids coming face-to-face every day. And if you go over to the remote learning column, Sinclair only has 227 choosing remote. Tradition only has 195 of their entire student population of 709 choosing remote. And so where you see the district totals, you can see that under the district average percent, that green bar, about district-wide, we've had about 48% of our students attending face-to-face. So to figure that out, you've got to take your 38% that are coming every day, and you have to take half of the 19%, because on any given day, you have half of that number coming. Because remember, that's the population of students that chose to stay on that emergency / hybrid type schedule. So about half of our students have been coming face-to-face, which again, if you refer in your mind back to the reentry protocol, currently in the moderate category, we should be around 50% of our students. Now, if you go to the next table below that, it's the same numbers, but what I wanted to show you is we added the percent, far right column, we added the percent of building capacity in the building. So at the high school, East Central High School, you'll see that 33% of the students at East Central High School are showing up face-to-face. Now, we've said that we can handle 50%. When people refer to a percentage of capacity, that's different than a percent of enrollment. We've been holding ourselves accountable very conservatively to percent of enrollment. But capacity at the high school is only being filled at 10%. Now, capacity is given to us by the fire marshal. Capacity is the total space, all of the classroom space, hallway space, library space, gymnasium space, cafeteria space, performing arts center space. So if conceivably we were to use every space simultaneously, we could spread kids out to such a degree that even if we were at 50%, that in theory, 50%, if we were at 50% capacity, it would be closer to 75% of our enrollment at the high school. And we could, in theory, keep them 6 feet apart and mitigated. So what we've been doing is that we've been paying attention down to the classroom level. And we have been really mindful of what 50% of our classroom enrollment size would be, and trying to keep that number of students at that 50% threshold. And in the event that we were over that or are over that by a student or two, what we do in each of those classrooms where we might have 1 or 2 more students than 50% is students are not only required to wear a mask, as is their teacher, but we also put splash guard desk carrels at every desk. So they have mask and desk carrels. Otherwise, if they're below 50%, then we just require them to wear a mask and distance at all times. The students are often working in small groups. Those groups rotate frequently as groups, and the makeup of the students within the groups, and then teachers creatively use space inside and outside the classroom to keep students apart and students moving. And that's what we've been doing since the beginning of the year, and we've gotten better at it as the year's gone on. And all of that has contributed again to what we feel is a safe school environment. But again, not to digress too much more, I just wanted to share that building capacity percentage. And you can see that Salado, Sinclair, and Tradition happen to be the campuses that are have the greatest percent of capacity, Harmony included, greatest percent of capacity, total building capacity occupied. Those campuses happen to have more of their student population choosing to attend face-to-face.
All right, thank you for that explanation there. But this, I want to get into academics a little bit, and the differences between remote and face to face. So overall, academically, how are students doing face to face versus remote?
Um, we feared that face-to-face students would be doing much better than students who are choosing the hybrid or intermittent face-to-face, then would the students who are remote synchronous, then would the students who are remote asynchronous. And generally speaking, that's kind of been the trend. Students coming to school every day tend to be doing better than students who are coming 2 or 3 days a week, tend to be doing better than students who are streaming in live to all their classes every day, then students who are not streaming in live consistently and they're trying to go at it after the fact on their own. So that being said, for several weeks now, since the time that we made face-to-face available for anybody who wanted it, we've been tracking how students are doing, and we've been inviting students back to school full-time face-to-face who maybe are struggling a little bit more academically. What we've seen over time is the percentage of students failing one or more classes who are face-to-face every day is now beginning to look more similar to what it would look like in a traditional school year. So overall, I think because we've shifted the student population, in other words, more and more students who are struggling remotely are in school face-to-face, they're starting to do better because they've been coming to school. But the overall failure rates are kind of leveling out. That being said, there are still a percentage of students. Well, let me clarify something. There's a percentage of students who have been attending school remotely and never have come face to face this year. I'm going to say 10 to 15% is the trend from campus to campus of the population that are remote only, who are absolutely thriving academically. In many cases, they're even doing better than they were when we were only offering face-to-face instruction. Now that's a 10 or 15% of about 50% of our student population in each of our schools. So it's in the minority of the remote group, but that's important because it tells us that some students actually flourish under the conditions of remote instruction. Perhaps they have more support at home. Perhaps that learning modality just fits their learning style much better. There's a lot of things they don't have to deal with, whether that's the social issues that students have to deal with in school, oftentimes, particularly as they move up to the secondary levels. And so they can just focus on academics. Now, that being said, there's a even larger percentage of remote students that are either doing at best similar to how they were doing previously, but in many cases, they're doing worse. And so for the ones that just, despite all their effort, despite our effort, they're just not advancing academically, we have been communicating with their families and essentially taking advantage of a Texas Education Agency option, which is to discontinue remote instruction. And so while we may not be saying that you cannot do any remote instruction, what we are saying is that remote exclusively is no longer available to you until we together can get you back on track academically. And we intend to continue doing that. In fact, many of you have received letters, phone calls, and correspondence from your teachers and campus administration if your child is struggling academically. Overall, I would say that we have more students struggling academically. The rate of growth is not happening at the rate that we would expect in a traditional school year. And that's not for lack of effort on staff or students' part in many cases. In some cases, it's a lack of effort engagement from some students. And so we're working with families on a case-by-case basis to change something if it's not working. And so please, if your child is one of those that's struggling academically, work with us to get them in school more frequently than they currently are so that we can work together to get them back on track.
While we're on the subject, a comment came up that does pertain to it. Ruby said she has tried to contact a few teachers and no response, unfortunately.
Ms. Pinones, if you don't mind contacting Brandon or I outside of this and let us know where your students attend school, and we will rectify that immediately. There's no reason why that should be the case, Ms. Pinones, and I greatly apologize on behalf of our staff, because that's not our expectation. That's not what we typically see as we monitor student progress and communication logs, but it's unacceptable. So we will circle back and get you the support that you need.
Ruby, you can just direct message the Facebook, and then we will help you out. So another question, and again, just straightforward. If my child is not passing, will they have to return to face-to-face?
Yeah, so we're going to strongly encourage it. We're going to say that if they are not doing well academically, we need them in our buildings. And we'll do so in a way that is safe and make sure that our ratios are where they need to be, and that we can risk mitigate. But we at this point in the year should have been working with struggling students and families to a point where we've exhausted all available options other than adjusting the percentage of time that they're remote versus face-to-face and trying to disrupt the progress in a more positive way.
So, conversely, if my child is doing face-to-face and doing really well, can they go remote until the positivity rate goes down?
The answer to that is absolutely yes. In fact, I would say that as we continue to monitor that Metro Health indicator bar, if it keeps trending, towards orange and towards red, in fact, we strongly encourage parents who feel like their child's doing really well. They've been attending face-to-face, but you have the ability to support them at home, that you want to do your part possibly to the greater whole, and maybe keep them home for a short period of time until we can see that positivity rate start to decline again. We'd encourage that. Again, the most important piece is your child's doing well, and you feel like they'll have the support that they need at home.
All right, so it is Q&A time. Folks, you can comment with a question and we will answer it. And we'll spend next couple of minutes doing that. Definitely a lot of, I'm looking at the chat here, definitely a lot of people expressing kind of the same thing that I said at the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Toscano, for always being on top of everything for our district and our students. God bless, be safe. Merry Christmas, blessings. We talked about at the very beginning, this wild idea that not many other districts were doing of doing a Facebook Live and putting ourselves out there and being transparent. And like I said, sometimes headlines can be what they are. They are what they are. So they see a headline, but to have you come on and explain it, it's so valuable. I mean, we thank you all from East Central for doing this.
That's my pleasure.
Let's see, Ms. Gaetan, my son's teacher was sent into quarantine by the school. Is she required to be tested before coming back to school?
So, Ms. Gaetan, generally retesting maybe, sometimes it could be part of the protocol for return, but they definitely have to complete the quarantine requirements by their physician. And it's very clear from the CDC standpoint that if they go beyond that 14-day window and they're symptom-free, that they're out of the woods in terms of being able to transmit the virus. And so we rely on their physicians and documentation we receive from them. And that's a really good question, because recently the CDC changed the guidance a little bit. And this would not necessarily be for a positive, but it would be for a close contact. So in some cases, we're seeing staff who have to be quarantined, but they didn't have a positive test. And of course, all of that is HIPAA protected. So oftentimes when a teacher is quarantined, we assumed it's because they were positive. But in fact, many times it's because they were in close contact. And so the 14-day quarantine period for someone who's in close contact, not positive, and doesn't have any symptoms and never test positive could be debilitating for them in terms of the leave that they have to exhaust. It could do this. It could harm students in similar ways. But what the CDC has said now is that if they have been in close contact and have not tested positive, if they have a negative test, within 10 days, that quarantine period could actually be 10 days. And in fact, they even say if they have a negative test and they've never tested positive and they weren't within 5 to 7 days that they could return after 7. Now, we have not done that, but there have been some cases where 10 days was more appropriate given the evidence. And again, we rely on working together with our health professionals in the district, with their physicians, and most importantly, with Metro Health in each case, so that they're not going to come back to work too soon and transmit the virus. And based on the overall data, it seems we've been able to do that very reliably. Thank you for the question.
Janie, she asked, when can we get them back in school? I believe my child can do better in school, and is the bus route still available?
Yes, Ms. Reese, the bus routes are still available. Contact your child's principal, and we'll get them back. We'll get your child back in school.
Let's see. Danny Santana, is there any way to ensure face-to-face learning until it goes red? My daughter didn't do well with remote learning.
Yes, sir, Mr. Santana. Our intention is to continue offering face-to-face instruction until we cannot. And even if we get into orange, where we have to reduce the number of students coming to the buildings every day, for students who have been struggling academically, either before, before we launched the emergency schedule, or if since we've launched the emergency schedule, students are just not doing well academically, they would be prioritized for that percentage of students that get to come every day face to face. So again, Ms. Santana, just work together with your campus principal. They'll look at how your child's progressing, and they'll make sure that if they're struggling, they're prioritized to stay face to face as long as possible.
All right. Again, we'll give about another minute or so for some question and answer session, and then we're going to have a very special announcement. That may some people may have heard about, and definitely well deserved. Anthony Rodriguez said, "Thank you for staying open. Our kiddos need their teachers." It's a hard decision. Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Did we lose Mr. Toscano? Can you hear me or no? Can you hear me? Hold on, we might be experiencing some technical issues here. Just stand by with us real quick. Let's see, can you hear me now?
Is that on my end, Brandon?
It might be. For those that are watching, if you can comment, if you can hear myself and Mr. Toscano. But let me try this right here. People say they can hear both of us, but for some reason we can't hear each other. Uh-oh. All right, so obviously he's having a hard time hearing us, but again, we want to thank everybody for watching, and we do want to talk about an announcement that we made earlier this week. Let me see if I could bring it up here, and they'll probably cue Mr. Toscano here. So can talk about the hopefully you can see it, and hopefully you could talk about this outstanding thing that we're doing. Can you see that? I guess all right, we might have lost him. All right, I think he's signing back in. So again, you might have seen this on social media. You might have even heard it through some of the staff that we will be doing a retention stipend for our full-time employees here. And let's see, all right. Can you hear me now?
Hey, I can hear you.
All right.
Okay. I fell off into cyberspace, got untethered. I don't know what happened.
All right.
What a bummer.
I just brought up the stipend and just started talking about it, but I'll let you go ahead and give the announcement here.
Yeah, well, this is a very uncertain year for a lot of reasons. We had tons of unforeseen expenses related to the pandemic. In fact, well over $1 million in tracking up, from devices to connectivity and infrastructure and meal distribution and all kinds of things that happen, PPE, sanitation materials and resources and extra staffing and all of those sorts of things. And then, of course, all the uncertainty in the economy led us to have to be very conservative with our budgeting this year. And unfortunately, the board was unable to approve a salary or compensation increase for any of our employees this year. And that was just an unfortunate thing. Fortunately, at the direction of the board, our CFO and I were directed to reconcile post-audit our state of finances, and we were able to find enough revenue to give every full-time employee in the district, those who were with us from at least May 29th last year and are still with us today, a $510 mid-year retention payment that you'll receive on December 21st. In addition to your December paycheck. And, the only taxes that'll come out of it are Medicare taxes, which is why we added an extra $10 in hopes that everybody would get a $500 payment. It's not enough. We know that. But the board was committed to affirming the commitment, the sacrifice, the risk that you've all taken. I mean, so many of the employees across the district never quit working a day since the onset of this pandemic. And they've continued to find a way to do better for our students, better for our staff, better for our community. It's been a year like no other. And in so many instances, our staff have been stretched beyond reason. But they all know what they signed up for. They all know how important they are for our kids and for the East Central community and the greater community. Then they all know that they're essential. And so with that, congratulations. It's a small token of appreciation, but the board made it happen. And I'm just thankful that we were able to do that with their support. So we wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a safe holiday season. We hope that everybody stays safe and continues to risk mitigate so that we get back and we don't find ourselves having to scale back because we know that it's important that kids can go to school every day, not just to learn, but so families can get to work. So thank you all for what you do, and thanks to this great community that we all get to live and work within.
Mr. Toscano, before we sign off, there are some criteria as it relates to this. And so someone did ask the question, so employees who transfer to the district this school year will not receive anything. I believe he's talking about, the date where employed by East Central ISD on May 29th and still employed. Can you address that?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, this was a small amount of overall revenue that we were able to find for this purpose. And so we had to prioritize folks who were with us last year who didn't see any kind of increase this year. So we stretched the date all the way to May 29th. And that captured enough employees that we were able to afford this with, enough full-time TRS participating employees. And so at this particular time, Mr. Tobias, it's for employees who were with us May 29th of last year and are still with us today. We will reconcile the state of finances again in the spring. And if there is any revenue available to put forth for the board's consideration for any additional compensation, then we'll put that forth at that time. And hopefully if it's possible, we'll include all full-time employees who are with us this entire year.
So, Mr. Tobias, definitely keep your fingers crossed, right? For the spring. Um, that is a definitely an awesome gesture. Chat room is just full of people saying that they're proud. Thank you. So tremendous support there. Um, I did want to point out too, real quick. I'm sorry. I did get some questions about when the deposit goes in for this, and it is December 21st, correct?
Correct. December 21st.
Okay. So for those
Now,
of you, oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
I did want to mention one more thing. A couple of years ago, the board adopted and we implemented a quarterly performance bonus program for employees who are in child nutrition, employees who are in transportation, employees who are in maintenance and custodial departments. And essentially, employees that are with us are familiar with those criteria that they have to meet in order to qualify for the quarterly bonus. So there are many employees across those departments who qualify for that quarterly bonus. It's a $300 bonus. And so there's a large number of employees who are in either of those four departments who not only qualify for the $500 mid-year payment, but they also qualify for the $300 quarterly bonus. So for many of our employees, that's a nice Christmas gift, if you will, that they have earned.
Absolutely. All right. So I just wanted to make sure that those two audiences knew that when the deposit would go in, and then if they came on board in the summer. So thank you for those questions. And so, Mr. Toscano, that brings us to a close. I know you did a great wrap up. Before I before I peppered you with a couple more questions, but I'll let you wrap this one up, and then we'll say goodnight here.
Yeah, I think I've said enough for a Friday evening. Apologize for the technical difficulties down the stretch. All of this is always archived and available for you to refer back to now and in the future. Brandon may have a few more things to say about that, but our intent is always to be transparent and forthright with our staff and our community, and to do the best we can through such an unreasonable in so many ways pandemic. But I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And if you have any questions or comments, keep in mind that our web pages have the Talk to Us tab, and we monitor those daily and throughout the day. So please, we want to keep the lines of communication open. Every bit of feedback is a gift, and we consider it in finding ways to serve you better. So thank you all. And Brandon, thank you as well.